The stars had always called to humanity. For 200 years they had answered that call. They built ships. They crossed the darkness between worlds. They made homes on 12 planets far from Earth. But in the grand scale of the galaxy, they were still small, still young, still waiting for their place at the table. The Galactic Council had ruled known space for 50,000 years. 400 species sat in its great chamber on Prime. They made laws, they kept peace. They decided who mattered and who did not. For most of human history among the stars, the Council had ignored them. Humans were too primitive, they said, too violent, too unpredictable, but humanity had grown. They had proven themselves peaceful. They had asked again and again for a chance to join. Finally, the Council agreed to listen. Ambassador stood before the mirror in her quarters aboard the UNS Olive Branch. She was 63 years old. Her hair had turned silver long ago, but her eyes still held fire. She had spent her whole life building bridges between enemies. She had ended wars on Earth. She had united the 12 colonies under one flag. Now she carried the hopes of 30 billion humans with her. "You look nervous," said Captain from the doorway. Smiled, "I am nervous, but I am also ready." The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel near Prime, watched through the viewport as the planet grew larger. It was beautiful. Oceans of purple, continents of gold, cities that sparkled like jewels. This was the heart of galactic civilization. This was where humanity would finally be accepted. Or so she believed. The council chamber was the largest room had ever seen. It stretched upward for what seemed like forever. Thousands of seats rose in circles around a central platform. Each seat held a representative of a different species. Some were tall and thin. Some were short and wide. Some had scales. Some had fur. Some had no bodies at all, just clouds of light that spoke with voices like music. Walked to the center platform. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. Every eye, every sensor, every strange alien sense was focused on her. Behind her, floating cameras broadcast her image to every human world. Billions watched. Billions hoped. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," began. Her voice was calm and clear. "I come before you not as a conqueror but as a friend. Humanity seeks no empire. We seek only partnership. We wish to trade, to learn, to grow alongside you. We offer our friendship, our creativity, our endless curiosity. We ask only for a chance to prove ourselves worthy." She spoke for 20 minutes. She talked about human art and music. She talked about their scientists and their dreamers. She talked about the mistakes they had made and the lessons they had learned. She talked about their hope for a better future, shared with all species. When she finished, silence filled the chamber. Then slowly a murmur began. Many of the delegates seemed moved. Some nodded. Some whispered to each other with what looked like approval. But not all. High Arbiter rose from his seat. He was a member of the oldest and most powerful species in the council. His scales were dark green, almost black. His eyes were yellow and cold. He stood 3 meters tall, and when he spoke, his voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "Enough," he said. The murmuring stopped. Looked down at with disgust. "You speak of peace. You speak of friendship, but we know what humans truly are. We have watched you. We have studied your history. You are a species born in blood. You slaughter each other over patches of dirt. You poison your own world. You breed like insects and spread like disease." Kept her composure. "We have made mistakes. We do not deny this, but we have also grown. We have changed." "Changed?" laughed. It was an ugly sound. "You have not changed. You have simply learned to hide your true nature. You are predators wearing the mask of prey. You are dangerous and you are unfit for civilized space." High Arbiter said carefully, "I understand your concerns, but I ask you to judge us by our actions, not your fears. Give us a chance to prove ourselves." Smiled. It was not a kind smile. "I will give you something better," he said. "I will give your species a lesson, one they will never forget." He raised his hand. Guards appeared from the shadows. They were like him, massive, armed. They moved toward. She did not run, she stood tall. "What is the meaning of this?" demanded a delegate from another species. "She came under diplomatic protection." "Diplomatic protection is for civilized beings," replied, "not for vermin." The guards seized. She struggled, but she was small and they were strong. They dragged her to the center of the platform, where a pit opened in the floor. From within came heat and the glow of fire. Sacred flame, used in ancient times to purify what they considered unclean. Looked up at the cameras. She knew billions were watching. Her children were watching. Her were watching. Every human in existence was watching. She did not beg, she did not cry. "You think this will break us," she said too. Her voice was steady. "You are wrong. You are making the worst mistake your species has ever made." Leaned close. "Your species will do nothing. You are weak. You are alone, and after today you will know your place." He gestured to the guards. They threw her into the fire. Burned. She burned while the galaxy watched. She burned while billions of humans screamed in horror. She burned while smiled and the council sat frozen in shock. But before the flames took her voice, she spoke one last time. Her words carried across the stars, into every human home, every human heart. "Remember me, remember what they are." Then she was gone. On Earth, in the city of New Geneva, Fleet Admiral Cole stood in the command center of United Earth Defense. He was 60 years old, built like a soldier, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. He had been watching the broadcast with his staff. He had been hopeful. Now he watched die. The coffee cup in his hand shattered. He did not notice the cuts on his palm or the blood dripping to the floor. He did not hear his officers crying out in rage and grief. He heard only last words, echoing in his mind. "Remember me, remember what they are." Across 12 worlds, humanity fell silent. The silence lasted only a moment. Then came the screaming. Then came the rage. Fathers held their children and wept. Mothers stared at screens with murder in their eyes. Young people who had never known war felt something ancient awaken inside them. On Mars, factories stopped. On Luna, ships powered down. On every human world, everything stopped. The species that had always been divided found itself suddenly united, not by hope, not by dreams, by fury. Admiral Cole finally moved. He wiped the blood from his hand and turned to face his officers. They looked at him with eyes that demanded action, that demanded blood, that demanded war. He gave them a single nod. "Get me the colonial governors," he said, "all of them now." He looked back at the screen, where the council chamber still showed accepting congratulations from his allies. The reptile thought he had taught humanity a lesson. He thought he had shown them their place. He was wrong. He had just shown them his. The galaxy waited for humanity to respond. They waited for panic. They waited for desperate pleas. They waited for surrender. They received silence. 72 hours passed after burned. In that time, not a single human transmission left their space. Trade ships turned back at the border. Communication channels went dead. The 12 human worlds became a black hole in the galactic network. No signals in, no signals out, nothing. On Prime, High Arbiter sat in his private chambers and smiled. He had expected this. Humans were cowards at heart. They talked big, but when faced with real power, they crumbled. They were probably fighting among themselves right now, arguing about what to do, too weak and divided to act. "They will send a surrender request within the week," he told his advisors. "Mark my words, they will beg us for mercy, and we will give them just enough to keep them useful as labor." His advisors nodded and agreed. Of course they did. No one disagreed with. But not everyone on the council shared his confidence. Ambassador of the consortium sat in her office, staring at the empty space on her communication screen where human channels used to be. They were old allies of but they had never been comfortable allies. They had seen what happened to species that crossed the hegemony. Something about this silence bothered her. "They should be screaming," she said to her aide. "They should be threatening. They should be doing something." "Perhaps they are simply afraid," her aide suggested. Shook her head. "I watched their ambassador die. She was not afraid, she was angry, and her last words were not a plea, they were a warning." She looked out her window at the glittering towers of Prime. For the first time in her long career, she felt afraid. Inside human space, something was happening that the galaxy could not see. Admiral Cole stood before a council of his own, not politicians, not diplomats, warriors, scientists, leaders who had been preparing for this day longer than most humans knew. "The unification protocols are active," Cole said. "As of 6 hours ago, the 12 colonial governments have dissolved. We are now one nation, the United Terran Confederacy." He looked around the room. Faces that had once belonged to rivals now showed only unity. The governor of Mars, who had fought with Earth for decades over resources. The admiral of the Outer Fleet, who had wanted independence for the frontier worlds. The director of Luna Industries, who had always put profit before politics. All of them sat together now. All of them were ready. "How long do we have before the council expects action?" asked General Sophia. "They will give us a week, maybe 2, Cole replied. "They think we are weak. They think we are divided. They think we will surrender." "And what will we actually do?" asked Director. Cole pressed a button. The wall behind him lit up with schematics, designs, and data that made several people in the room gasp. "Project Prometheus," Cole said. "For 40 years we have been preparing for this. We knew the galaxy saw us as primitive. We knew they would never respect us. So we let them believe what they wanted to believe. We showed them old ships and basic weapons. We played the part of the harmless newcomers." He gestured at the screen. Ships unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Sleek, black, bristling with weapons that bent the laws of physics. Drives that could cross the galaxy in days instead of weeks. Artificial intelligences that could coordinate 1,000 ships as one mind. "The truth is different," Cole continued. "Our scientists have not been sleeping. Our engineers have not been idle. We are not behind the council in technology. We are ahead, far ahead. And now, finally, we have a reason to show them." The room was silent. Then slowly, a grim smile spread across General's face. "How many ships?" she asked. 3,000 ready now. 10,000 more within 6 months. We have been building in secret for decades. Hidden shipyards in asteroid fields. Factories buried deep inside moons. The galaxy thinks we have 100 warships. They are wrong by a factor of 30. Dr. Park, head of weapons development, spoke up. "The Council relies on kinetic weapons and plasma, standard technology that hasn't changed in 10,000 years. Our antimatter torpedoes will cut through their shields like paper. Our particle beams will melt their armor in seconds. They have no defense against what we have built." Admiral Cole nodded. "But this is not just about weapons. This is about will. They have bullied this galaxy for. They burned our ambassador because they thought they could. They thought no one would stop them. They were wrong." He looked at each person in the room. "I will not lie to you. This will be war, real war. People will die. Ships will burn, but we will not be the ones who break. We will not be the ones who surrender. They took someone from us. They took her in the worst way possible, and they smiled while they did it." His voice hardened. "They will not smile again." The next 48 hours were a blur of activity across human space. Factories that had been making consumer goods switched to military production. Engineers worked around the clock. Ships that had been hidden for years were brought out of storage and crewed. But it was not just the military that mobilized. Ordinary people demanded to help. Teachers volunteered for logistics. Farmers offered their harvests to feed the troops. Artists created propaganda that spread across every world. Musicians wrote songs of defiance. Children drew pictures of their martyr, their saint. There was no need for conscription. There were too many volunteers. Humanity had always been divided, different nations, different cultures, different beliefs, but now they were one people, one purpose, one rage. On the final hour of the 72nd day, Admiral Cole stood before a camera. His image was broadcast not just to human space, but to every corner of the galaxy, every species, every world, every being with eyes to see or ears to hear. To the Galactic Council, he began. His voice was cold, controlled, terrifying in its calm. 72 hours ago, you burned our ambassador alive. You burned a woman who came to you in peace. You burned her while her family watched, while her species watched. You did this because you thought we were weak. You thought we would do nothing. He paused, let the words sink in across a trillion screens. You were wrong. We do not want your apologies. We do not want your explanations. We do not want your peace. You had your chance at peace. You burned it. What we want now is simple. We want you to understand. We want you to know down to your bones that what you did was a mistake. The worst mistake in the history of your council. The worst mistake in the history of your species. He leaned forward. You burned her alive. You made her a martyr. Now we will make you a memory. The transmission ended. At the edge of space, where their border fleets patrolled with lazy confidence, sensors began to scream. Alarms blared. Officers shouted in confusion. Space itself seemed to tear open as ship after ship emerged from faster-than-light travel. 3,000 warships, each one painted black as space, each one bearing a name written in fire on its hull. Yeliane. The first Terran armada had arrived, and humanity's war had begun. Admiral commanded the Third Border Fleet. For 30 years he had guarded this stretch of space. Nothing had ever challenged him. Nothing had ever dared. When his sensors detected the human fleet emerging from faster-than-light travel, he laughed. 3,000 ships, he said to his officers. Against our 800, the humans are brave, I will give them that. Foolish but brave. He ordered his fleet into battle formation. Standard tactics. The same tactics that had crushed 100 rebellions over the form a line, present maximum firepower. Let the enemy break against your shields like waves against rock. The human ships did not slow down. They did not form lines. They spread out like a swarm of black insects, moving in patterns that made no sense to eyes. They were too fast, much too fast. Fire ordered. His ships fired. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds streaked across space toward the human fleet. It should have been a massacre. The human ships danced. There was no other word for it. They moved in perfect coordination, each ship seeming to know exactly where every shot would land. Bolts that should have hit empty space. Rounds that should have torn through hulls hit nothing. It was impossible. Then the humans fired back. The first ship died in a flash of light so bright it blinded sensors across the fleet. The second followed a heartbeat later. Then the third, the fourth, the fifth. Stared at his tactical display in horror. His ships were vanishing, not retreating, not surrendering, simply ceasing to exist. Human weapons tore through shields as if they were not there. Armor melted like ice in a furnace. Impossible, he whispered. This is impossible. 11 minutes after the battle began, it was over. The Third Border Fleet was gone. 800 ships, 40,000 crew, gone. The humans had not lost a single vessel. News of the battle spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The hegemony tried to suppress it, but there were too many witnesses, too many censors, too many species watching with hidden satisfaction as the bullies of the galaxy finally met something they could not bully. On Prime received the report in his private chambers. He read it 3 times. Then he threw the tablet against the wall and screamed. Impossible, he roared. The humans are primitives. They cannot have technology like this. Someone is helping them. Someone is giving them weapons. His advisors cowered. None of them dared tell him the truth. No one was helping the humans. The humans had simply been smarter than they had believed. Much smarter. Over the next 6 months, the war unfolded in ways the galaxy had never seen. Human fleets appeared everywhere at once. Their faster-than-light drives were beyond anything the Council had ever developed. A fleet could attack a world, vanish, and reappear 100 light-years away within hours. They could not defend everything. They could not predict anything. They were fighting an enemy that moved like ghosts. But the humans were not monsters. This became clear as they captured world after world. They did not bomb cities. They did not slaughter civilians. They blockaded military installations, cutting off supplies and reinforcements. They gave soldiers the chance to surrender. Those who did were treated well. Those who did not were destroyed without mercy. On the colony world of, human ground forces landed to secure a military base. The base commander, a young named, expected brutality. He had been told humans were savages who ate their enemies. Instead, a human officer approached him under a white flag. "Your base is surrounded," the human said. She was small by standards, barely half his height, but her eyes held no fear. "You have two choices. Surrender your weapons and your soldiers will be fed, housed, and eventually return to space. Or fight and die. The choice is yours." Stared at her. Why not simply kill us all? The human's expression hardened. "Because we are not you. We came here for justice, not genocide. Your leaders burned our ambassador. They will pay for that. But your people, your soldiers, your families are not our enemies. We know the difference." Surrendered. So did a dozen other commanders across space when they realized the humans meant what they said. Word spread among the military. The humans were harsh but fair. They were killers but not murderers. This was not what they had been told. This was not what they had expected. Doubt began to spread. Back on Prime, grew desperate. He called an emergency session of the Galactic Council and demanded action. "We must unite against this threat," he declared. "If the humans defeat the hegemony, they will come for all of you next. This is not just our war. This is a war for galactic civilization itself." Some species agreed. They feared humanity. They feared what humanity had become, but others hesitated. Ambassador of the consortium rose to speak. "The humans have not attacked any non-world," she said. "They have not threatened any other species. Their war is with you, High Arbiter, with you and your hegemony. Perhaps if you had not burned their ambassador alive, we would not be in this situation." His eyes blazed. "You dare blame me?" "I dare speak the truth," replied. "Something that has been rare in this council for far too long." She turned to the assembly. "The consortium will not send ships to die for arrogance. We are withdrawing from this war." A gasp ran through the chamber, then another species stood, and another, and another. Within a week, half the council had declared neutrality. They were alone. Had one final card to play. The council peacekeepers. A combined fleet assembled from dozens of species, meant to crush any threat to galactic order. 3 million ships, gathered over centuries, the largest military force ever assembled. He ordered them to attack human space directly. Cut off the head, and the body would die. Admiral Cole received word of the approaching fleet while aboard his flagship, the TCS. He studied the tactical data, then called his commanders. 3 million ships, he said. Impressive numbers. General raised an eyebrow. "You don't seem worried." "I'm not. Numbers mean nothing if you can't catch your enemy. Our drives are 3 times faster than theirs. Our sensors are 10 times better. They're bringing a hammer to fight smoke." He outlined his strategy. The human fleet would not fight the peacekeepers head-on. They would split into 100 smaller groups, strike and vanish, hit supply lines, destroy communications, turn the massive enemy fleet into a blind, starving beast stumbling through the darkness. The peacekeepers entered human space expecting a decisive battle. They found nothing. Human worlds seemed abandoned. Human fleets had vanished. For 3 days they searched. Then the attacks began. Supply ships exploded without warning. Scout vessels disappeared. Communications relays went silent. The peacekeeper commanders screamed for information, for orders, for anything. They received only static. And in the darkness, human ships struck again and again. Within a month, the peacekeepers had lost half their fleet without ever fighting a proper battle. They retreated in chaos, broken and humiliated. On Prime, a human infiltration team slipped past security and entered the council chamber. They did not plant bombs. They did not assassinate anyone. Instead, they left a gift. A holographic projector activated in the center of the chamber. It showed a figure standing in flames, frozen in the moment of her death. Beneath her feet, a countdown timer glowed. Stared at the image of the woman he had murdered. For the first time in his long life, he felt true fear. The countdown was not to an attack. He understood that now. It was to something worse. It was to judgment. And it was coming for him. The hegemony had ruled its corner of the galaxy for 12,000 years. In 9 months, it fell apart. It did not fall because of human weapons, though those were terrible enough. It fell because of something they had never understood: hope. For they had crushed other species beneath their boots. They had burned worlds. They had enslaved billions. And through it all, they had told themselves they were superior, that they were meant to rule. Now they watched their fleets die. They watched their colonies surrender. They watched smaller species that had cowered before them for generations suddenly stand tall and refuse to bow. The people began to ask questions. Why had their leaders started this war? Why had they burned a diplomat who came in peace? Why were young dying for the pride of old fools? On the Eve, protests began, small at first, then larger, then impossible to ignore. Soldiers refused orders. Governors locked their doors. The hegemony that had seemed so permanent began to crack. Sat in his fortress on Prime and watched his empire crumble. He raged. He threatened. He ordered executions. But fear was no longer enough. The people who had once obeyed him saw death coming either way. They chose to face it standing up. His own generals moved against him. They came to his chambers on a cold morning, 9 months after died. General Eth led them. He had served for 40 years. Now he stood before his master with a weapon in his hand. "It is over," Eth said. "The war is lost. The hegemony is lost. You are lost." Rose from his throne. Even now, even broken, he was terrifying. "You would betray me, after everything I have done for you." "You have done nothing for us," Eth replied. "You have done everything for yourself. And now millions of our people are dead because you wanted to make an example of one human woman. She was vermin, they all are. They are the ones who beat us. Perhaps we were the vermin all along." The generals arrested. They sent a message to the human fleet, offering the former High Arbiter as a peace offering. "Take him," they said. "End this war. Let us rebuild." Admiral Cole's response was simple. "We do not want him gift-wrapped. We want him to answer." The trial began 1 month later. It was held in the same chamber where had burned, the same platform, the same walls. But now, instead of a human woman standing alone before hostile aliens, a tyrant stood in chains before the galaxy. Was not the only one on trial. The entire history of the hegemony was laid bare. 12,000 years of conquest, 12,000 years of cruelty. Species that had been silent came forward with their stories. Worlds that had been burned, peoples that had been enslaved, children stolen, cultures destroyed. The galaxy watched and learned what kind of empire it had allowed to exist. But the heart of the trial was the woman who had come in peace, the woman who had been burned alive for the crime of asking for friendship. The prosecution was led by a human lawyer named Sophia. She was 40 years old. She had her mother's silver hair and her mother's fire in her eyes. For 9 months she had waited for this moment. not for revenge, for justice. She presented the evidence calmly, the recordings of her mother's death, the communications proving had planned the execution in advance, the testimony of witnesses who had watched in horror but been too afraid to act. When she finished, she looked at the creature who had murdered her mother smiled back at her. "You think this trial matters," he said. His voice echoed through the chamber. "I did what the strong do to the weak. That is the way of the universe. It has always been. It will always be. Your mother was weak, so she died. If you were strong, you would do the same to me." Sophia did not flinch. "You think strength means cruelty. That is why you lost. That is why your empire fell. You never understood that real strength comes from something else." "And what is that?" "The ability to choose. My mother chose to come here in peace, even knowing the risk. She chose to reach out her hand, even to those who might bite it. She chose hope over fear. That takes more strength than you have ever had." She turned to the assembled delegates. "We had the power to destroy we had the weapons to kill every in existence. We chose not to, not because we are weak, because we are strong enough to know the difference between justice and genocide." She looked back at, "You burned my mother because you thought it would teach us our place. Instead, you taught us yours. And your place is in chains, answering for your crimes, while the galaxy watches and learns what happens to tyrants." Said nothing. For the first time he had no response. The jury was made up of 12 species. All of them had suffered under rule. All of them had been conquered, oppressed, or threatened. Some had waited centuries for this moment. They found guilty. Guilty of murder. Guilty of crimes against sentient beings. Guilty of 1,000 atrocities committed over 1,000 years. The sentence was not death. Sophia had argued against execution. Death was too easy, she said, too quick, too merciful for someone who had shown no mercy. Instead was exiled to a frozen moon at the edge of known space. Alone, with nothing but a shelter, basic supplies, and a screen that played one recording on an endless loop. Burning, her last words echoing forever. "Remember me, remember what they are." He would spend the rest of his natural life watching the woman he murdered die again and again, unable to look away, unable to forget, unable to escape the consequences of his choice. Some called the sentence cruel. Sophia called it fitting. With the trial complete, the real work began. The Galactic Council had failed. It had allowed to commit atrocities it had stood by while an innocent woman burned. It could not continue as it was. Admiral Cole met with representatives from 100 species. Together, they drafted a new agreement. Not a council of the powerful, a compact of equals. Every species, no matter how old or young, would have a voice. Every species would be protected, and one law would stand above all others. No species shall ever be burned for seeking peace. They called it the Galactic Compact. It was signed on the anniversary of his death, in the same chamber where she had burned. The first signature was Sophia's, writing on behalf of humanity. The second was Ed's, writing for a reformed people who wanted to be more than their history. Sophia stood at the podium where her mother had once stood. She looked out at 1,000 species. She did not speak. She simply held up a small object, her mother's diplomatic credentials. The edges were scorched, the surface blackened by fire. But the name was still visible: Ambassador, Peacemaker, Mother. The chamber was silent. 1,000 species remembered. Then slowly they began to applaud, not for victory, not for war, for hope, for the possibility of something better. For the woman who had died believing in it. 10 years passed. The galaxy changed in ways that would have seemed impossible before the war. The Galactic Compact grew stronger with each passing year. Species that had fought learned to talk instead. Trade routes that had been closed by greed opened to everyone. Scientists from 100 worlds shared their discoveries. Artists created works that blended traditions from across the stars. and humanity was at the center of it all. Not as conquerors, not as rulers, as builders, as dreamers, as the species that had proven something the galaxy had forgotten, that mercy was not weakness, that justice was not cruelty, that even those who had been wronged could choose to be better than those who wronged them. On a quiet farm on Mars, Admiral Cole woke with the sunrise. He was 70 years old now. His hair had gone white. His hands shook slightly when he held his morning coffee, but his eyes were still sharp and his mind was still clear. He spent his days tending to his crops. Tomatoes, corn, beans, simple things, real things, things that grew and lived and did not require death. Sometimes reporters came to interview him. They wanted to talk about the war, about the victories, about the battles that had made him famous across 1,000 worlds. He always said the same thing. "I hope we never have to do that again. I hope they never make us." They asked him if he was proud. He told them he was tired. War was not something to be proud of. It was something to be survived, something to be learned from, something to be prevented if possible. But when they asked if he regretted it, he shook his head. "They burned her alive," he said. "They smiled while they did it. What would you have done?" No one ever had an answer for that. Sophia served as High Speaker of the Galactic Compact for 8 years. She traveled to 100 worlds. She negotiated treaties. She settled disputes. She gave speeches that were studied in schools across the galaxy. But every year, on the anniversary of her mother's death, she returned to Prime. The chamber had been transformed. Where the fire pit had once burned, a garden now grew. Flowers from 1,000 worlds bloomed in soil mixed from 1,000 planets, and in the center stood a simple stone marker. She came in peace. Sophia would sit there for hours, sometimes alone, sometimes with her children. She would tell them stories about their grandmother, about her kindness, about her courage, about the way she always believed that people could be better, even when they gave her every reason to think otherwise. "Did she know?" her daughter asked once. "Did she know what would happen?" Sophia thought about it. "I think she knew it might happen. She went anyway, because she believed it was worth the risk. She believed that if even one person on that council listened, really listened, it would matter. But they didn't listen. They killed her." Yes, but the galaxy listened, and that mattered more than she ever could have imagined. The people walked a difficult path. Their empire was gone. Their reputation was destroyed. Many species refused to trade with them, refused to speak to them, refused to acknowledge that they existed. But slowly, painfully, they rebuilt. A new generation grew up learning the truth about their history. They learned about the conquests, the cruelties, the crime that had started the war. They felt shame for what their ancestors had done. Some fled to other worlds, changing their names, hiding their scales. Others stayed and worked to prove that could be more than monsters. Human cultural exchanges began cautiously, artists first, then scientists, then students. Young came to human worlds to learn. Young humans traveled to space to teach. It was awkward, it was painful. Old wounds did not heal quickly, but it happened slowly, one conversation at a time. On the 10th anniversary of the war's end, a diplomat stood before the Galactic Compact and delivered an official apology. She was young. She had been a child when burned. She had no part in that crime, but she spoke for her people anyway. "We cannot undo what was done," she said. "We cannot bring back the dead. We cannot erase the suffering, but we can promise to be better. We can promise to remember. We can promise that no one will ever again raise their hand against someone who comes in peace." Sophia accepted the apology. She shook the diplomat's hand. Cameras captured the moment and broadcast it across the galaxy. Later, in private, the young asked Sophia how she could forgive, how she could shake hands with a member of the species that had murdered her mother. Sophia smiled sadly. "My mother believed in forgiveness. She believed in second chances. She believed that enemies could become friends if only someone was brave enough to reach out first. I honor her memory by trying to be as brave as she was. The young bowed her head. I do not deserve such kindness. Perhaps not, but you have it anyway. That is what it means to be better than our worst moments. Across the galaxy, children grew up with a new understanding of humans. They were taught that humanity was kind, curious, and eager to explore. They learned about human art, human music, human science. They heard stories about the brave ambassador who had died reaching out her hand. But they also learned the other lesson, the one that every species carried in their bones now. Humanity had a line, cross it and they became something else, something terrifying, something that could not be stopped, could not be bargained with, could not be survived. The galaxy had seen what happened when someone crossed that line. They never wanted to see it again. On a distant space station, a human traveler sat in a bar, sharing drinks with aliens from a dozen worlds. They had been talking for hours, telling stories, laughing, building the kind of friendships that would have been impossible a generation ago. A young alien, barely an adult by their species standards, leaned forward with a question. Why do other species treat humans with such respect? I have noticed it everywhere I go. They speak carefully around you. They watch you. It is like they are afraid, but also something else, something I do not understand. The human thought about it for a moment. Then they smiled. It was a sad smile carrying the weight of history. Because we showed them what happens when you burn someone who only wanted to shake your hand. The young alien nodded slowly. They did not fully understand. They were too young to remember the war, too young to have seen the footage of a woman dying in flames or the footage of fleets vanishing in seconds. But they understood enough. They understood that the kind, laughing human beside them carried something inside, something that slept but never died, something that hoped for peace but was always prepared for war. And they understood that as long as the galaxy remembered, that something would never need to wake up again. On a frozen moon at the edge of known space, an old reptile sat alone in a metal shelter. His scales had turned gray. His eyes had grown dim. He could not remember his own name most days, could not remember the empire he had ruled, could not remember the power he had held. But he remembered her. The screen in front of him never stopped playing, day after day, year after year, the same recording, the same woman, the same flames. Remember me, remember what they are. He had tried to destroy the screen once. It repaired itself. He had tried to look away. Something always drew his eyes back. He had tried to die. The medical systems kept him alive. This was his punishment, not death, remembering. He would remember until his last breath. And when he finally died, alone and forgotten, the galaxy would not mourn. But they would remember too. On Earth, in the city of New Geneva, a bronze statue stood in a garden of flowers. Cast in metal, her hand extended in greeting. Her face was peaceful. Her eyes looked toward the stars. Beneath her feet, words were carved into stone. She came in peace. They chose war. We chose to end it. Every day people came to see the statue, humans and aliens alike. They left flowers. They left messages. They stood in silence and remembered a woman most of them had never met. She had died reaching out her hand, and because she had, the galaxy had learned to reach back. The stars still called to humanity. They always would. But now when humans traveled among them, they traveled as friends, as partners, as the species that had proven something eternal and true. That even in the darkest moment, even when fire consumed everything, hope could survive. Had believed that. The galaxy remembered. And that made all the difference.